This is AgGrad Live,
We have all of the different segments within the cotton.
the show that explores what it's really like to work in the ag industry,
So making sure that we get policy and regulatory issues
straight from the people who live it every day. Good afternoon, everybody. We are back live on Facebook for another episode of AgGrad Live. This is where we sit down here live on Facebook with someone who's doing big things in the industry of agriculture. And here lately, it's been the winners of the AgGrad 30 under 30. So these are all individuals doing amazing things in the industry of agriculture before their 30th birthday. Pretty exciting stuff. And it's been so much fun because we've really captured sort of the diversity of agriculture and looking at things from a variety of different lenses. And so every episode has been completely different. And this week is also going to be really, really exciting because we're going to explore something more on the research side of agribusiness. So this is private industry, but looking at sort of research and innovation and how that comes up through a company, and very, very interesting. In fact, a co-op in this case. But I want to bring on our guest here today. We have Dr. Bo Harstine. Thank you for being on the show, Bo.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, we were just talking before we went live here about what we wanted to cover, and then the list kept getting longer and longer and longer. So I'm going to try to get as much as this as I can because all of it is super fascinating. But first, maybe just start off by telling us about your role and your employer.
Yeah. So my role within Select Sires, my employer is my title is the Director of Research. And so I always say that I do three main things in that role. And I've been doing it for about 2 years. So I've been learning as I go. But number one is conduct in-house research. So Select Sires is a bull stud or a cattle genetics company that sells bull semen all over the world. So a lot of the in-house research has to do with raising bulls, collecting them, processing the samples, freezing them, and shipping them. And that'd be number one, foremost, the job. Number two is collaborating on research. So that's working with faculty at universities or within other companies to do research that we can't technically do in-house. And number three is kind of searching for biotechnology. So going to academic conferences, meeting with other scientists, talking with other people in the industry, and trying to find scientific technology or biotechnology that we can use in-house to better help customers.
It sounds like a big job. I mean, especially for somebody, earlier in their career. I imagine, though, they didn't just kind of pick you out of a random lineup of somebody who seemed like a nice guy to work with. You probably had to work your way up to that level. What does somebody who likes science but is interested in kind of private industry, private enterprise, what does someone like that do to kind of position themselves for a role like yours? Or maybe speak from your own experience. What did you do to get there?
Yeah. Well, I would not say that it's been easy and that I didn't work at it. So I actually got my foot in the door several years ago at this company. While I was in college, I did an internship for them. And it was actually an internship that didn't exist. So I really went out on a limb and contacted them to try to work in their laboratory doing research. That culminated in working with them through graduate school. And so I was able to get offered a job upon graduation, but it's been some pretty recent shuffling and being competitive that allowed them to give me this opportunity to step into a larger role. So I've been learning as I go, and the company, just like all of the other cattle genetics companies, are changing really rapidly right now, especially with consolidation and biotech, and the processing that goes with it has become a much larger deal. So it's been fun.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you maybe a little bit to brag on yourself here a little bit, but if somebody asks you to, it's okay. But what do you think, just speculating, what do you think it was about what they'd seen from your performance that made them comfortable with giving you this big responsibility?
I think I think I had a good curiosity about the industry. So I did grow up on a dairy farm, which helped in starting out. When I was in college, I wasn't doing anything related to cattle. Technically, it was more, I would say, like the hard sciences, molecular biology, cell biology. So I think that impressed them, that I could take my love of agriculture and cattle, my ability to talk with cattle producers and go on farms, which was important, and then combine it with some of these really hard science skills to get the job done. So it was probably a combination.
And had you always been really interested in science? I mean, since you were a kid, or when did that passion arise? Agriculture, I think a lot of us can understand because you kind of grow up around it, and it feels like it's in your fiber. But what about science? I mean, for so many of us, myself included, we understand the importance of science and we're curious about it, but boy, it seems daunting at times, just the technical aspects of it. Is it just something you've always taken to?
I think it was growing up, especially being on a farm out in the country, and then dealing with livestock. I mean, I work in cattle breeding, so when you start seeing artificial insemination of your family's cows and seeing breeding and genetics and pedigrees come to life, I was always really interested. But I would say that you have no idea until you're older the different niches that you can go into or specialties. So, I mean, growing up, I always assumed that if I liked cattle and I liked science, I'd probably have to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to college assuming I'd actually become a medical doctor for humans. But it was through that internship that it kind of clicked like, oh, wow, I can specialize in something very specific within not only animals, but cattle, and learn a lot and have a career where I'm always asking questions and trying to answer them. So it took a while to figure that out, but I work with a lot of young people and I always encourage them to go down that path.
Definitely. I mean, it's amazing how many people I talk to, in the 30 under 30, but also I do another podcast called Future of Agriculture and talk to a lot of kind of innovators in the industry. And it's amazing how many people I talk to that an internship can have such a big impact on their life. Because you're right. When, before you go to college, you could probably count the amount of career opportunities you can think of on your two hands. And then you start to take courses, get interested in subjects. And then where it really opens up is these internships. And I think that's so cool that you've kind of risen from intern. I don't know if you saw it on the screen, but earlier I put like intern to director of research, but you've kind of risen, through those ranks, and you've kind of got to experience your employer from multiple perspectives. So talk more about Select Sires, though. I don't think I realized until maybe today that it's actually cooperative. And when we think of cooperatives, a lot of times our mind instantly goes to like farmer cooperatives, and so it's like a group of local farmers. But this one's a little bit different. So talk to us about how Select Sires is set up.
Yeah, so in the late 60s, early 70s, essentially bull studs started to join a cooperative in kind of a semen trading sense so that they could pool their resources and the genetics of the cattle they had to reach a larger market. And so that has grown today into definitely serving all areas of the United States. There are 6 cooperatives of Select Sires. And I work at the headquarters, which is based in central Ohio, just out of Columbus. And what we serve as at the headquarters is like the factory. We're making widgets. We have almost 2,000 bulls here in Ohio that we're collecting regularly. And those co-ops, the 6 around the United States, serve as the distributors of the product. So we're collecting bulls, freezing the product, sending it to them. And those cooperative members employ the salesmen, the technicians, all of the consultants that are working under the Select Sires brand to advise farmers on mating cows, even doing the artificial insemination and all the services that go with it. And then that expands far beyond the United States as well. So we have international brands, and we actually send semen to 95 countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
I see you've got a white coat behind you, and I think that's how a lot of people picture someone in research and development is white coat and a microscope and a lot of Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing. Talk to us about what does the day-to-day look like in doing this type of work, and what keeps you excited to hop out of bed every morning and get after it?
It's always different every day. So yeah, there are those days that I spend at the computer reading papers, writing papers, analyzing data. But I travel quite a bit. So I'm presenting information that we learn here at academic conferences or just attending. I always, when I was going deeper into science and learning what I wanted to do, I always knew I was going to do animal science because I couldn't be crammed in a laboratory all day, especially growing up with cattle. So I was lucky, especially through graduate school. All my research was with bulls and livestock. So I'm definitely out in the barns. So there's always good dialogue between my employees here, especially those that work in the barn. So some days I come in wearing a button-up shirt some days not. But there's always boots and some coveralls in my car. I'm ready to go anytime.
I know you do a lot of work as far as sort of agriculture literacy and wanting to reach out and making sure people understand, what we do in the industry of agriculture. So I want to ask you maybe a couple questions from maybe an outsider perspective. The first is just about kind of what you do in terms of why do producers decide to use artificial insemination instead of natural breeding, with an actual bull on site?
Oh yeah, so I have to educate people about this every day, because whenever you say that you work for a bull stud or that we collect bulls and freeze their semen, there's a lot of questions that come with it. And so I mean, the majority of dairy cattle in the United States and increasingly around the world are artificially inseminated, and that's because the bulls that we have here, as well as the other main AI companies, are the best in the world. So with the technologies we have now, we can predict how good these bulls are, and most importantly, how good their daughters will be. And so no one farmer could probably afford to own them and naturally service their cows. So we collect them and we allocate the collections into many hundreds, if not thousands, of artificial insemination doses. And so we're able to spread those genetics out, prevent the spread of disease, and it's a lot safer to not have herd bulls on the farm also. So most dairy cattle are artificially inseminated, which is why we've been so awesome as an industry about increasing the efficiency of milk production. And now with beef, more and more beef cattle are artificially inseminated, especially internationally. So we're becoming much more efficient at getting good genetics to make beef more efficiently.
And is that is the safety aspect? Is that just because of handling? Someone who's working out there handling a bull and the risks that can be associated with maybe an aggressive bull. Is that what you mean by safety?
Exactly. Nobody likes bulls on farms. They're not always friendly animals.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the efficiency thing makes so much sense too. I mean, if you can, optimize the production of the livestock, I mean, there's a sustainability story there too. I would think, like if you're having an inefficient operation, you're probably utilizing too many resources for the output you're putting out of the world. So I bet there's a sustainability aspect there too, I would think.
Yeah, and I have coworkers that work more so in data analytics than anything, and so we're understanding more and more. I would say the cattle industries are a little bit behind some of the other livestock sectors, but we're just learning more and more through the power of genetics. The efficiency increases you get on a dairy farm or in a beef operation. It's really incredible.
Talk a little bit more on the technology side. What's got you excited about advancements in genetics, either that have recently happened or you see coming on the horizon that might affect the way that you all handle your research in Select Sire's business?
Yeah, I mean, a big concept in all cattle industries right now is genomics.
Mm-hmm.
And so we shift from more of genetics, looking at daughters and production of animals, to actually predicting it, sometimes before the animal's even born. And so genomics really runs our industry. So we genomic test, and we look at the DNA sequence of that animal, SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, to predict how good they'll be. So actually the most popular bulls in the world are the little newborn ones that aren't even able to make any daughters yet. So that fuels the industry. The data that goes with that. So we're predicting how good these animals will be. We're verifying or validating it with data. That's a huge concept. And each of the genetics companies is doing an awesome job at trying to make cattle production more efficient. Another big one is gene editing. So as we start to collect data and understand traits, we're able to introduce proprietary traits that we want. So I think gene editing is going to be a big concept in the future. There's been a lot of research and even a lot of publicity about that in the animal industries.
And so are we eating gene edited beef now, or if not, when do you think we will be?
So by definition, gene edited, we're not right now. We could be in the future, especially researchers are pursuing that out of the United States right now. So the whole concept of branching into government policy and regulation is really important also for livestock industries right now. So anything that's gene edited is actually treated as a drug under the Food and Drug Administration. And so the only gene-edited animal we eat right now is salmon, the aqua bounty salmon. That's taken almost 20 years to get to market. So in cattle, no, nothing right now.
Interesting. Oh, I find this stuff just kind of endlessly fascinating. So I know for you personally, you also are a professor at Ohio State University. How, you're kind of like living the dream here. How are you able to have such a important role in select sires, but also, teach at the university? And how's that balance go between those two things?
I would say the professorship position is just kind of an add-on. So luckily, it's not too much of a day-to-day responsibility, but it gives me access to all of the research that's going on there, and it also gets me in front of students. So I do a lot of guest lecturing. It makes it easy to work with university with their graduate research programs, their graduate students. So just kind of a perk. And because we're in Columbus, Ohio, we have a pretty good working relationship with some of the agriculture departments there.
What do you think is what's the least? What do people understand the least? Maybe is a good way of asking this. What do people understand the least about what you do?
Ooh.
Or what do they misunderstand?
Yeah, I think something that people misunderstand is you get into these concepts, and I always make sure I relate it back. You know that we do most of this technology in humans. So depending on who I'm talking to, I often start relating it. You're using this jargon and you're like, well, you understand what in vitro fertilization is, IVF, right? Yes. Well, if you go to a human fertility clinic, you actually see a lot of this same technology being used to create the next generation of us, humans. And other than that, I think that people just don't know a lot about it at a base level. So you have to explain what artificial insemination is, explain how the cattle industries work, because people are a little detached. We all know that.
Yeah. I think that is something a lot of people don't understand. And so maybe from a practical level, if a producer is thinking about how he wants to breed, let's say in the dairy context, a producer is thinking about how he wants to breed, or he or she wants to breed their dairy cows. What's step one? Do they look at a catalog of pictures of bulls and then say, I want that one, and order it, and it shows up next day delivery? How's that work from a practical standpoint?
Yeah. So I mean, before the age of internet, everything's digital now almost. But yeah, there's a catalog. You go through, and most producers are efficient and good at management, so they know the pedigrees of their cows. So yeah, they're trying to match up. They're trying to mate cows, bull, to the cow they want to create a better and more efficient offspring. So that could be with the phenotype, which means the conformation, also the production, the health traits that go with it. And so that would kind of be old school, looking at daughters and looking at bulls and trying to match them up to your cows to make a efficient and profitable daughter. But now we've gone all the way to genomics. So by you submitting a DNA sample of your females, the cows that you have, they can really be matched to the best bull that's available. And we're talking thousands and thousands of purebred of that breed within an industry. So it's down to a science for sure.
Wow.
And the bigger the farm, probably the more hands-off the farmer is. They may be completely reliant upon a cattle genetics company to come in, perform these genomic tests or pedigree-based matings, and also deliver the product. So it's frozen, it's cryogenically frozen, and we think good forever on the farm. So you thaw out and you perform artificial insemination. Hopefully your cow gets bred each time.
Yeah, and then do you list? I guess conception rate is probably relative to not only the semen itself, but also the situation in which they are administering it. Do you kind of track conception rates at all, or is that kind of a different thing?
No, we definitely do. Farms know their on-farm statistics or the data they collect really well. They have to, because breeding cows is a huge part of your profitability. So your goal is to have cows get bred and then come back into lactation so that they remain profitable the whole time, usually on an annual basis. And then we definitely collect millions and millions of those breeding records here, and all the companies do. So there are branches of the USDA that collect that data for us. and share that back. We collect it internally. So it's a really, really data-driven industry as a whole. So we use that for selection of animals, essentially. We know which bulls are fertile. We know which ones are a little bit less fertile. And producers, we advertise that. Producers definitely select for that.
Yeah, no, I sure would if I were in their situation.
Yeah.
What about sexed semen? Can I make sure that I buy something from you that's going to produce a heifer calf as opposed to a chance of a bull calf?
Yeah. So in cattle, the technology to sex sort semen has been perfected over a few decades. And so that means that we take a sample, we run it through a machine called a flow cytometer, and it's able to determine whether that individual sperm cell could make a male calf or a female. So if it's a male, if it will make a male calf, it has a Y chromosome, female an X chromosome, and the machine can sort it, physically sort it. So when we sell a dose of sex sorted semen, you have a 90-95+% chance of getting the sex of calf you want.
Wow.
Yep.
Man, this stuff is so cool. I'm going to throw one at you totally out of left field, and this is just where my mind went, and I don't know why, but I want to ask you this. So there's a lot of talk right now of like lab grown meat, and can we cellularly, I don't know if that's a word, cellularly grow meat in a lab? Is there any talk about that in terms of like, in the semen industry? Could you kind of cellularly produce your product as opposed to having to collect it from an actual bull?
Yeah, I have those discussions with collaborators, and it always comes back to, it's actually, I would consider it in the same ballpark as lab grown meat, because I don't think there's any way it's as efficient or economic as just the animal doing it right now. But yeah, and when you talk about reproduction and fertility and some of the technologies that go with it, I always branch into human medicine. And so, yeah, there's some interest in that in humans. And so there's much more funding and money being put towards those type of research and technology. So if it gets done in humans, it'll definitely trickle down into the agricultural industries. Yeah.
You drew the parallel earlier between in vitro fertilization, like in humans, to kind of explain what you do. Literally, do you all do in vitro as well? I mean, do you sell, if somebody wants to buy both, the egg and the semen, kind of a fertilized egg to implant in a cow? Can they do that as well?
Yeah, so all of these AI companies, we rely heavily on IVF and some of those advanced reproductive technologies to make animals. Yeah, we probably will sell embryos in place of sperm cells in the future. Almost all of our bulls are made with IVF these days, so it takes the female and the male side. So we're working with really genetically or genomically elite females, and we collect oocytes. And people who are used to working with cattle are pretty familiar with these terms. So we're collecting oocytes or flushing, and then we're creating the next generation of bulls. So it hasn't been for a while that it's the traditional mating of the cow has the world's best bull calf anymore. Yeah.
What one thing I want to ask you about, because I love talking to scientists, because so much of what I do, I'm kind of reading it. It goes from the scientist to someone who can communicate it to me, and I'm just kind of like trying to figure out for an average person like myself, and if I want to learn more about the food system, be it how milk is produced or how beef is produced, what advice do you give someone who's not going to probably go read the scientific journals of all these industries to learn more about the food system in an objective way, where I'm not just going to be influenced by an agenda?
It's been hard, and I always try to make myself available. So I mean, some of the social media platforms can be really good. I think that consumers just have to direct themselves to unbiased and knowledgeable sources of information. So as I meet more and more scientists, and this is in all fields, I think that just like in agriculture, we have to do a better job of communicating to young people about what we do. There's that level of detachment. And, I think 4-H, FFA, Farm Bureau, a lot of those services do a good job at educating. And it's something I think that I think millennials like myself are starting to understand more. If you should pride yourself on being well spoken about what you do. You should have a good elevator speech and not use jargon and just be able to describe to the public what you're doing. And people are surprisingly receptive to it. People love to learn about that. And
Yeah.
I live in a pretty major city. And so it's constant conversations at the grocery section, at the grocery store, at the milk case, you name it. I'm always having those conversations.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, no, I bet. I mean, if you were my neighbor, I'd be like bothering you every time you stepped out of your house to ask you more questions, because I mean, I think it's such an important topic, in general. I saw a Facebook post go around recently, and nothing against this post, but it just kind of represents sort of the rhetoric I think is the wrong direction, which is like, it was all good intentions. It said something like, my ag degree is worth more than your Google search or something. It was something like that, and it's like, okay, well, that's totally representative of taking an approach that has zero empathy. It's gonna definitely resonate well with people who agree with you, but it does nothing to bridge the gap with people who don't agree with you. It's basically saying, trust me, don't trust anyone else. And it's it kind of represents sort of our problem here, which is like, we think everybody should just listen to us just because. And so I like what you said about get rid of the jargon, put it in terms that are actually going to be helpful and not talking down to people. So I think that's really, really important. Animal agriculture faces quite a bit of pressure, not just from people, everything from like greenhouse gases. People are kind of down on animal agriculture about greenhouse gases. Obviously you've got plant-based alternatives, maybe some cell-based alternatives coming in the future. What keeps you bullish, to use a pun there, about the future of animal agriculture, this industry that you've committed your career to?
I think the big concept of like feeding the world has really been motivating me lately.
Mm-hmm.
So as Americans, and most of the interactions I have are with other Americans, especially young people who may not be exposed to the advances that we've accomplished in modern agriculture, and they're phenomenal. And so a lot of the technologies we're using are used to feed the world. Not every country has had animal protein available to them every day just by walking into a grocery store up until very recently. And so some people are really enjoying the fruits of agriculture's labor in getting animal protein out. And so I think that's a big portion of it. Food choice is a huge one. And so especially in some of the leadership type of groups I've been in, they've also started to educate on how not to knock people about their food choices. So we're fortunate that we have them. I, like most people, went out and tried Impossible Burger. It's all based on preference. And so people will always have a preference for what type of milk they want, whether they would prefer to eat meat or never eat meat. And I think the ability to choose is the beautiful thing about all this. We have so many options. But the most important thing as a scientist is that with all of these options, scare tactics have been a big thing.
Yeah.
People need to understand on a base level, as Americans, it doesn't matter what we're eating, that it's all safe. That's such a huge concept right now in the plant industries and animal industries. So everything goes through FDA. This is all very safe food. And people just are starting, I believe, to take it for granted. So regardless of your decision, it's safe. And it's been very, very thoroughly tested. And scientists are not malicious people.
Definitely. And that brings up another question. And I'm asking you some hard questions here from all over the map. So I hope you don't mind. But this one's more about sort of getting other academics in agriculture. And so here's what I see. I see college expenses through the roof. I see it getting more and more difficult to get into reputable universities in PhD programs. I see a lot of foreign students coming into PhD programs and then not able to get visa sponsorship to stay and having to leave again. And so it does it concern you about kind of getting other people like you in the future, PhDs from a farm, interested in agriculture, want to go back and advance this industry? Does it concern you about the capacity to do that as those trends sort of converge?
I'm not worried, and I would say that I'm a strong recruiter for the industry. I mean, we all know, those that work in agriculture, that a less and less or decreasing percent of people grow up on the farm. I
Mhm.
hope that's never a barrier for somebody. And I always speak about my process towards getting into this career. So, I mean, I'm a first generation college student, didn't know the path that I would go down. But most research based graduate school is paid for. And I mean, it's paid for and you get paid. So it's not always, cost is not always a barrier. We just need well spoken, intelligent, and very curious people to be working in these industries. And as far as international training goes, um, as I said, that's looking at agriculture on a worldwide scale. So America still has phenomenal agricultural education and scientific training, and so these people are gaining skills and knowledge in the United States at our major universities, the land grant universities, and applying them in their home countries. So they're up and coming. They would like to have agriculture. People are envious of United States agriculture.
Yeah, we have it pretty good here, and a lot of opportunities, and so I'm excited and optimistic about the future as well. Bo, this has been such a great interview. Where people need to follow you on Twitter. Are you at Bo Harstine on Twitter?
Yep, you got it. Just my
I'm
name, first and last.
put it right up there. Follow Bo on Twitter. This has been such a great interview. Thank you very much. I really, really have enjoyed this. I have been on a biology kick lately. My wife's going to hear this and roll her eyes because it's just been, it's like, this thing that has been around forever. And I've just, for whatever reason, sometimes you just get curious at the right place at the right time. And so everything we've talked about here today has been extremely relevant to what I've been thinking about. I think other people listening as well. So thank you again. Follow Bo on Twitter. Bo, congratulations again on the 30 under 30. Well deserved. And look forward to more big things from you and Select Sires. So thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you for joining AgGrad Live. Visit aggrad.com, that's AgGrad, to join the community, create your profile, and learn more about careers in the agriculture industry.